One of the reasons I had the idea of starting this business, going back to my story framework, is when I was working in public health, a lot of my job depended on engaging audiences who needed the services and programs that were being offered or developed, or whose input was very important to me and my colleagues as we developed policies and program reforms, and realizing that the way the communications was happening was just like not speaking the same language with audiences and wasn't meeting their needs. The other thing that when we would bring help in, consultants and other vendors, sometimes they would just start using language that most people in the room, including myself at the time, didn't know how to speak. They're talking about branding and marketing in an environment where that is not happening, that conversation or that language. And so the first thing I like to do when I talk about brand storytelling is define brand, just to level set that, demystify it for anybody who's, I think we all come to our work and having small businesses from so many different directions. So can you go to the next slide? In terms of what I'm going to talk about, what a brand is, and then a little bit about what a brand is not. So I want to invite you to think of a brand as a very as an expansive entity and power, really, or force in for and in your business. It's one of the most valuable business assets you have, for sure. It's the power source for all of your communications and marketing. And I separate communications and marketing because communications happens external, yes, that's your marketing, but also internal to your friends and family when you're first starting your business, your community members, former colleagues, and then eventually your clients, and then eventually the staff you have. And it's very important to keep an eye on that because it's a really important audience there. A brand's a collection of both tangible and intangible components. There are parts of brands you can sort of see and touch and feel, and other parts that are much harder to account for, but are really, really also important. Things like the client experience, and as Moni was just talking about, the feelings and that side of the experience of a brand. So there's what the eye can see, and there's much more. It's pretty common to hear about brands spoken about as visual. Brand equals logo, for example. Brand equals, what I see on a page or on a website. But there's much more. Think about like an iceberg. There's the part you can see, and there's all the part underneath. And the part underneath is really, really essential. It's holding up the amazing thing that our eyes are taking in. And the two parts require one another. A brand's a living, evolving entity, and it is shaped by both internal and external conditions. So this means, I sometimes when I talk about brands and when I think about brands, which I do a lot, I think of them as something that's, especially in a room of fellow entrepreneurs, like our brands sprung from our hearts and our minds. There is a story there, as we've just talked about, and that in and of itself, that power, as Moni was talking about, like tapping and channeling that, is so important. It also means that it is a dynamic entity, and it needs to evolve. It needs to adapt. It needs to find its footing at different times, whether internally in the life of the business owner or in the some other internal aspect of the business. Things are changing and shifting, or externally in the market. And so those are also very important aspects. And brands are interdependent. So Moni said earlier, I love the way you said it, that now I'm not going to say it exactly right, but that people sell businesses. Is that how you put it? Like people, we buy because of the people, and the people are
Yes.
buy, something to that
Yeah.
effect.
People buy from
So
people. Yes.
thank you. People buy from people. Um, and when I think about branding, brands have amazing stories to tell, and we're here to talk about why that's important and how to do it. But there is this interdependence, just like things in nature. The strongest aspects of nature have an interdependence and an interrelationship. Brands depend on people, and people depend on brands. And I really do think, especially now, actually, in the media environment we're in and the other environments we're in, people are looking for where they can hook in to something that feels authentic to them, which is, we'll talk more about this, but why that authenticity piece is so important. So that interdependence is a very important part of what a brand is. Okay, great. So what isn't a brand? A brand is not. It's not a standalone or detached part of your business. It's not just the name or the logo, as I said before, or your services. First of all, that strips out all the great stuff that Moni was talking about, and it really whittles down the brand in a way that disallows the leveraging of its full power. It is not simply visual. It is not static, and it's in constant motion, which isn't to say, you know, you're on an ongoing roller coaster. That is by no means what I mean. And I probably should rephrase that to say that, as I said before, like it's dynamic. It's not ever static, and that it is self-sustaining, and it is not self-sustaining. So it requires input, it requires care, it requires attention, it requires investment. It requires a back and forth exchange between the people who are the brand keepers, the people who are developing and telling the story of the brand, the people who are experiencing the brand, those audiences, and the other brand champions that are helping tell the story. And it's not only communications or marketing. It crosses all parts, all touch points of your business. This is how I define a brand. A brand is the heart and soul of your work or business, set in motion through myriad channels and touch points where they connect with people. Under the right conditions, a brand effectively communicates its story to audiences in ways that engage them as co-creators to brand power. This co-creation with audiences is really, really critical. I think sometimes, Moni and I came into the work we do now with similar experiences with more sort of traditional or old school marketing approaches, where audiences are treated almost like there's this predatory or like competitive energy with audiences. And that has changed a lot over time, but it can still sometimes feel that way, like, especially if the first goal always is profit. Audiences become so commodified and depersonalized. And I think of my audiences and all of your audiences as true co-creators. And by coming at it in the spirit of that type of relationship and that mindset, you just have this incredible amplified ability for everybody to win, your brand, your audiences, and your business.